This story is based on real stories. If you like this type of story, follow this page, because every day we publish new and exciting stories like the ones you will see now. No one dared to say her name in the hallways of the Velasquez Hotel. To everyone, she was just the bastard daughter, the shame that should never have existed. Aurora grew up behind the scenes of the empire, observing from afar the luxuries and privileges that the Velasquez surname offered. But never to her. Her mother, former chambermaid, had been the lover of the powerful Alvaro Velasquez for 5 years. When she became pregnant, she was dismissed as an uncomfortable burden. Aurora was born without rights, without recognition, with only the burden of carrying half of a surname that she could never use. She grew up listening to the whispers, the looks of contempt, the coldness of those who knew who she was, and chose to forget. But she did not forget. The pain, the silence, the injustice, it was all fuel. While Alvaro's legitimate children studied abroad and paraded through the halls of power, Aurora worked in the hotel's own laundry, hidden, invisible, and silent. But she observed every movement, every face, every weakness. There was no luxury that could deceive her, only one desire, to be free, and one day, to be heard. What she didn't know was that that day was closer than she imagined. And when the empire began to crumble, she would be the one to raise the ashes. The news came like a silent storm. Alvaro Velasquez was dead. A massive heart attack in his penthouse alone, surrounded by expensive paintings and tarnished memories. The family wept, the newspapers extolled his legacy, and the partners silently disputed the inheritance of the empire. But no one knew about the will, not even his legitimate children. The document, kept under lock and key, would only be revealed at the wake. And it was there, amidst flower arrangements and hypocritical tears, that the truth began to tear at the family's golden veneer. Aurora, dressed in simple black, arrived in silence. No one recognized her right away. Some whispered, others looked away. But she walked firmly to the coffin. She looked at her dead father, the one who had never called her daughter, and whispered, "Now it's my turn." When the family lawyer stepped up to the pulpit and opened the sealed envelope, the world seemed to stop. Alvaro will leave everything to Aurora. He won't leave everything. The hotels, the investments, the properties. She was the only legitimate heir recognized in the will. The room froze. The legitimate children were shocked, and Aurora, for the first time, smiled. The silence after the reading of the will was more deafening than any scream. Helena, Alvaro's eldest daughter, widened her eyes as if she had been slapped. Rafael, the youngest, just stared at the lawyer, trying to understand where the trap was. "This is a mistake, a farce," Helena murmured, her voice trembling. But the documents were there, signed and registered months before Alvaro's death. Aurora remained impassive, as if all of this were just another ordinary day at work. But inside, the wounded child in her chest danced. For the first time, she was not a mistake. She was not the secret hidden behind the curtains. She was the name at the top of the paper. "You've never seen me. Now you're going to have to swallow me," she thought, without moving a muscle. The guests looked at each other, uncomfortable. The wake had become a spectacle. The Velasquez empire had just changed hands, and what would come next, no one could predict. Aurora didn't just want justice. She wanted to rewrite the whole story, her way. The morning after the wake, the newspapers printed the impossible. Aurora Velasquez, the forgotten daughter, inherits the entire hotel empire. On social media, comments were divided between scandal and curiosity. Internally, chaos was taking hold like a fire that no one knew how to put out. The hotel, employees didn't know whether to applaud or fear. The directors, all loyal to the old structure, refused to answer her calls. Helena and Raphael filed a lawsuit to contest the will. They called the new heiress an opportunist and a fraudster, invented rumors, and brought up photos from her mother's past, trying to tarnish her image. But Aurora remained firm. She didn't react publicly. She didn't give interviews. She locked herself in the room where her mother had worked as a chambermaid, inside the main hotel, and began to study everything. Every contract, every hidden debt, every secret that Alvaro had left behind. She discovered flaws, manipulations, bribes. The empire was not as solid as it seemed. But she was unfazed. Aurora didn't just want to take the throne, she wanted to rebuild it from scratch, with her own rules. And if anyone dared to stop her, they would have to relive the pain she had carried for years. And she knew how to do that better than anyone. At the first meeting, with the shareholders, Aurora entered with the same firmness as someone who knew every brick of the place. Because she did. She knew where every crack was hidden, where every false smile lived. She wore an elegant black suit, but without exaggeration. Simple, direct, sharp. When she introduced herself as Aurora Velázquez, many frowned. It was the first time they had heard her use the name that had always been denied her. One of the oldest partners, Mr. Delgado, tried to question her. With all due respect, do you know what you're doing? Aurora looked him straight in the eye. I know more than all of you put together. While you were drinking champagne in the ballrooms, I was cleaning the blood that was leaking from the cracks of this empire. Silence. At that moment, she no longer needed to prove anything. She was the new leader. Not by right alone, but by competence, by survival, by merit. She signed documents, appointed new advisors, fired those who knew too much, and made sure to keep those who had always been ignored, the invisible ones like she had once been. Aurora didn't want to repeat history. She wanted to destroy it and reinvent everything about what it meant to be a Velázquez. Helena did not accept the blow. In fact, she turned it into a war. She began a subtle campaign to discredit her father, spreading lies in the press, suggesting that Aurora had manipulated her father in his final days of life. She poisoned his mind, brainwashed him. He was sick, she said, her eyes full of fake tears in front of the cameras. Raphael, less dramatic, sought support from foreign investors, trying to undermine the authority of the new president. But none of them knew how to deal with Aurora's silent strength. She did not defend herself publicly. Instead, she responded with actions. She renovated the main hotel, increased the salaries of the old employees, brought new ideas to modernize the chain, and attracted the attention of the media for her efficient management. It was impossible to ignore her. The rejected woman was now international news. But with each step, she did not forget. The cold nights, the looks of contempt, the dishes refused in the cafeteria. She did not need revenge with words. The greatest pain of those who despised her was to see her shine. And Aurora knew this. With each achievement, she buried deeper the ghosts that once tried to silence her. Even with the empire in her hands, Aurora felt a void that power could not fill. On lonely nights, in the room where her mother had silently died, she would talk to the old portrait, yellowed by time. "Would you be proud of me, Mother?" she would ask, staring into the mirror. But there was no answer. There was a constant echo of the childhood she had been denied, of the hugs she had never received, of the name she could only now use without fear. Public recognition was a cold trophy. Inside her, the scars still pulsed. The betrayals, the judgmental looks, the loneliness of growing up, in the dark corners of a world that saw her as a mistake. Sometimes, she found herself wishing she had inherited nothing, just a real family. But that wish was dangerous, and she knew it. That was why she suffocated everything with work. Endless hours of meetings, strategic decisions, and endless renovations. She wanted to make the Velázquez hotels something her mother would never have been ashamed to clean. But the more she grew, the more she felt the ghosts around her. And the biggest one was about to appear. Helena was not backing down. She was just waiting for the right moment for the final attack. Helena was cold, calculating, and the heir to her father's arrogance and manipulation. She knew she wouldn't beat Aurora in the business game, so she decided to beat her in the only area where she was still vulnerable, emotionally. She took advantage of a charity event that Aurora was hosting, which was covered by the press, to show up unexpectedly. Elegantly made up, with a rehearsed air of humility, she walked up to the new owner of the empire and held out her hand. "We come in peace. We are sisters after all." Aurora hesitated. All eyes turned to them. For a second, her heart wanted to believe it. But there was something in Helena's eyes, something that Aurora recognized well, a lie. Even so, she shook her half-sister's hand. The press loved the scene. The Velázquez's reconciliation made the headlines. Backstage, Helena asked for a private dinner, including Raphael. "For our father," she said. Aurora accepted. She wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, there could be a start to something new. What she didn't know was that that dinner would be the perfect trap for her downfall. The dinner seemed cordial. Wine, forced smiles, stories from the past being told as if it were all part of a romantic novel. Raphael praised Aurora's management. Helena said she had been hasty, that she was willing to work alongside her. But deep down, Aurora felt like a lamb among wolves. The next morning, she woke up to a notification on her cell phone. Her name was in the newspapers, involved in an alleged document fraud. The article stated that she had forged her father's will with the support of a former employee of the network. It was all a lie. But the evidence had been planted. Contracts had been altered. Audio recordings had been forged. Even Alvaro's signature seemed questionable. Helena had prepared everything months in advance. Now, Aurora's image was tarnished. Investors were threatening to withdraw capital. Shareholders were demanding immediate clarification. For the first time, Aurora felt her empire slipping through her fingers. And worst of all, she didn't know who she could trust. The war was no longer just against the past. It was against the present, and against their own blood ties. The Velázquez Hotel's headquarters was as silent as the grave. Aurora walked through the hallways that had once been filled with her strength, but were now filled with whispers and suspicious glances. The false accusation of fraud had shaken everything up. Some board members had asked for temporary leave. Others had resigned, citing ethical discomfort. Investors had disappeared like rats, fleeing a ship. But what hurt Aurora was not the loss of support. It was the feeling of being alone once again. The world seemed to repeat the same cruel pattern, offering everything only to rip it away the next moment. For a few days, she disappeared. She turned off her cell phone, left the media, disappeared from the headquarters. Rumors began to circulate. Did she run away? Is she in crisis? Guilty? That was all Helena wanted. But Aurora was not running away. She was rebuilding herself, relearning to listen to the silence. In an old cabin belonging to her mother, isolated in the mountains, she found old notebooks, old photos, letters that her mother had never had the courage to deliver. She read about the fear, the shame, but also the pride she felt for her daughter. It was there, amidst memories and pain, that Aurora realized the name Velasquez had never really been hers. But she no longer needed it. The war was not over her surname. It was over everything he had tried to bury. And now she was ready to dig it back up. Aurora returned to the empire that had rejected her. But she came back different. She didn't introduce herself as Velasquez, nor as CEO. She showed up at a public meeting of the company with an unexpected proposal to give up absolute control and transform the empire into a transparent holding company with collective leadership and linked social projects. Many thought it was a sign of weakness, but it was the opposite. It was an act of intelligence. With this move, she attracted new investors interested in innovation and social responsibility. She brought in big names in modern management. And what's more, she disarmed Helena and Raphael's main legal arguments, which were based on the centralization of power as abuse of inheritance. Little by little, the empire began to rebuild. Now under a different name, Aurora Foundation, maintaining the hotel chain but transforming part of the assets into professional training institutes and shelter for women at risk, like her mother once was. Helena, upon seeing this, felt the blow. She lost her speech. She could no longer play the victim. The public was now on the side of the woman who, even though she had been attacked, was giving back to the world something greater than revenge: dignity. But Raphael, wounded in his pride and his pocketbook, was not ready to accept defeat. While Helena sat in silence in the face of her public downfall, Raphael went for the only thing left: the low blow. He tried to manipulate the remaining shareholders with promises of secret profits, leaked distorted internal information to the press, and even hired detectives to dig into Aurora's past, looking for any slip-ups. But Aurora was no longer the vulnerable girl she had been. Nor was she the frightened woman of the previous weeks. She had anticipated this. She hired a compliance team, opened up all of the Aurora Foundation's finances, and made her history available to the authorities. They can investigate as much as they want. Those who owe nothing have nothing to fear. The response was a shot in Raphael's foot. His attempt to manipulate documents had put him at the center of a corporate scandal. And this time, he was the one who fell. Arrested for corruption, abandoned by his allies, humiliated by his own arrogance. Aurora did not celebrate in public, but as she left the courtroom, she looked up at the cloudy sky and whispered, "Now, yes, Mother, we are free." She had not won by cleverness alone. He won because he understood that some wars are not won by fighting the enemy, but by refusing to become like him. Months after Raphael's downfall, a simple ceremony took place on the terrace of the chain's first hotel. The same one where, years before, her mother had been treated like an inconvenient secret. Now, that space welcomed women, young people, and children, celebrating the inauguration of a new institute. On stage, there was no pomp, just Aurora, in a simple dress, with her hair loose and eyes steady. She walked up to the microphone, and before talking about numbers or goals, simply said, "My name is Aurora, and that is enough." The audience applauded, not for her last name, but for the woman before them. A woman who chose not to repeat the mistakes that marked her, who built something greater than power, a true legacy. As the sun set behind the buildings, Helena, discreetly among the guests, watched in silence. For the first time, she saw Aurora not as a rival, but as something she would never be: free. Aurora smiled, not for others, but for herself. There, in that moment, she understood that victory lay not in destroying the empire that rejected her, but in rebuilding it on a new pillar. One where the bastards, the forgotten, and the silenced could finally be heard. She did not inherit an empire. She created her own, and that one no one else could take.